Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on many different farm to school grant opportunities that are available to you all here in Vermont. My name is Connor Floyd. I'm the grant programs manager here at the Agency of Education, and I'm joined by my colleague Gina Clitheroe from the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. You can jump to the next slide. So a little bit of an overview of our agenda as well as some tech. So this webinar is being recorded. Folks are muted, your cameras are off. If you do have any questions, we ask you use the Q&A feature if possible within Teams webinar. They'll make it easy for us to track those questions and make sure that none get lost. If you're more familiar with chat, though, we'll try to catch any that come up in the chat as well. I am going to drop into the chat right now. Let's see, or I will once I pass it over to Gina. But I'll try to add our slide deck here for those that are looking for a PDF of the slides. Although you should also be able to click on any of the links that we have in the slideshow as we're going through our presentation. And so what we're going to cover today, first we're going to do a pretty brief overview of what is Farm to School, just to kind of set the table, give some context about where these different grants might fit into your Farm to School program. We'll give a kind of really top level overview of the calendar of these different grant opportunities and when you could expect for them to become available. And then we'll spend most of the webinar today going into a little bit more detail about many of the different grants that are offered throughout this school year that could support your farm to school program. The caveat that I'll give here at the top is that each of these grants has like a 1-hour webinar or that's coming up, or a recording, or a lot of different grant guidance. So of course, we're not diving deeply into any of these. This is really that top level overview. I'll often get a lot of questions from folks asking, what grants are available for farm to school? What should I be thinking about? And this webinar is really to answer that question and give you a lay of the land. And from here, you can, highlight the grants that you want to learn more about. And in the resources that we'll provide, there's going to be a lot more learning opportunities for you there. And then we are saving quite a bit of time at the end for questions and answers. So again, use that Q&A feature. We're going to try to roll through the specific grant section and then save those questions for the end, just to make sure we are able to cover each of these different opportunities. Let's see. You can jump to the next slide, Gina.
Wonderful. Thanks, Connor. So as Connor said, I will be co-facilitating this webinar. My name is Gina Clitheroe. I use she, her pronouns. I'm with the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. Connor and I work pretty closely in the programs that we manage, and this is one of the first opportunities for us to kind of like together have a chance to give you all a greater picture of how the grants each of our agencies offer kind of complement each other to support farm to school across the state. I am going to offer like a brief overview of what farm to school is and what kind of the focus of all of the goals of these programs are at a high level. But before we dive into that, I'm just going to throw up a quick poll to get a sense of who's in the room. So, Connor, can you see the poll? Is it showing yet?
Yes,
or
I can.
No?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, it's up.
Great. So I would invite folks to, if you can, participate in that poll. So we got 7 responses so far. some school administrators, some child nutrition professionals. Great. Farm to school service provider. Some people writing in the chat. Oh, the poll's having issues. Sorry. Okay. Well, thank you all. If you have the chance to, I continue to invite you to keep kind of adding in some early childhood educators I'm seeing in the chat, community members with the local school district, grants manager. This is great. Okay. Thank you all so much. I'm going to continue on with my slides and hopefully those responses can keep kind of trickling in. So what is Farm to School? So Farm to School is an education strategy that connects Vermont youth with the land, local food, and farmers and food producers in our rural communities here in Vermont. The benefits of Farm to School are far-reaching and well documented at a national level by the National Farm to School Network. Some of the benefits of Farm to School programming are benefits to public health, education, economic development, the environment, and community engagement. You'll see in this slide deck, these are some images of what Farm to School looks like across the state. It looks like buying food from local farms. It looks like taste tests to help kids connect with and understand the food that they're eating in different nutrition education initiatives. Looks like school gardens and after-school programs for high school students. It looks like early childhood programs, visiting and connecting and partnering with their local farms through field trips or working with plants in the classroom as part of the class curriculum for biology or science class. So Vermont is a national leader in the farm to school movement across the country. Vermont was one of the first states in the country to have an annual grant program for farm to school, which was started in 2006 with the passage of the Rosa McLaughlin Farm to School Act. And Vermont has continued to have a high degree of engagement with farm to school and farm to early childhood, both in the K-12 settings and also in early childhood education settings. Farm to school is quintessentially Vermont in many ways. A thriving and diverse agricultural landscape is what makes Vermont so special, and farm to school programming helps sustain our working landscape and build food security for Vermonters while investing in the future of Vermont and building stewardship of our natural resources. So when we are thinking about farm to school, one of the critical models that we think about is this 3Cs model, which is engaging youth with agriculture in the classroom, the community, and the cafeteria. So those are the 3Cs of farm to school. This foundational model was developed by Vermont Feed, which is a partnership of NOFA Vermont and Shelburne Farms. And it's been widely adopted across the country as a strategy to build integrated and sustainable farm to school programming at schools and also in early childhood education settings. Farm to school programs that leverage this 3Cs model really integrate farm to school throughout the culture and practices of the school. So farm to school is not an add-on to regular coursework and activities, but it's really integrated into the core practices of the school across subjects, across educators. It's not just led by one teacher and then those initiatives are vulnerable to change when there's staff turnover. This 3Cs model of engaging across all 3Cs helps build really sustainable programs. So that's really a foundational overview of what farm to school is and what it looks like. In this next animation, you'll see some examples of what this can look like in school communities. So in the classroom, farm to school looks like agricultural education and nutrition education. In the cafeteria, it looks like serving local food to Vermont youth and supporting Vermont farms through those regular sales. It also looks like building community partnerships, like those field trips to visit local farms. And then there are all these other activities that are, integrated in interdisciplinary in nature, like a harvest dinner or taste tests or farm visits and school gardens. And when schools and early childhood programs are building their work so that it's not just one of the three C's, but all three C's are getting attention and care, that's when there's a greater likelihood of the farm to school program being what we call an integrated farm to school program that has sustainability baked into the model. So those are some examples of what this could look like. I also just want to mention that, oh, I was going to give some stats here. Okay, so let me give some stats. According to the 2024 USDA Farm to School Census, 80% of Vermont school food authorities provide nutrition, food, or agricultural education. 69% of Vermont school food authorities are serving local food at least once a week. And 59% of Vermont school food authorities have edible gardens at their schools. So this just gives a sense of like the centrality of farm to school in Vermont schools and early childhood programs, although that survey is really focused on the K-12 area. So one of the key policy tools that we have to grow farm to school in Vermont is the annual State of Vermont grant programs. And this webinar provides an overview of the grants available this fiscal year to help farm to school grow across the state. This quick snapshot is that overview of all the different grants that we're going to talk about today. And Connor and I just wanted to lay that out on top of this 3Cs models to give some perspective about the focus areas of these different funds. So as you can see, a majority of these grant programs are really focused on getting more local food into the cafeteria or supporting child nutrition programs in processing and storing more food, which could support them in buying more local food as well. And then at the center here, the Farm to School and Early Childhood Grant and the Farm to School Service Provider Grant, those are programs that do really rely on that interdisciplinary model and not just being focused on the cafeteria, but those funded projects also focus on the classroom and the community. So I know that was a lot of information, but just wanted to provide that overview of what the 3Cs model is about, what farm to school in Vermont looks like, and then what some of the goals at a high level of these different grant programs that we're going to talk about today are aiming to achieve. And with that, I'll pass it back to Connor.
Thanks, Gina. So here's kind of our first look at the grants that we're going to talk about today, organized by roughly what season do they become available in. And so as you can see, we have quite a few that are going to open up this fall and a couple in the winter, and then the state equipment grant becomes available in the spring. A couple of the early questions that I've seen in the chat are, is this webinar right for me? Is this applying to folks new to farm to school or farmers? And I'd say broadly, yes, right? So if you're brand new to farm to school, this is going to give you a great lay of the land. We've kind of got 3 grants here that are geared towards farmers. So Gina's going to talk about the Farm to Institution Market Development Grant, which is squarely within that producer farmer demographic. And then both of the local Food for Schools programs are in some ways, interacting with farmers. And a lot of this will kind of help you as a farmer or producer be well positioned to partner with schools. I was going to share our matrix, but I'm not seeing how I can upload a PDF into the chat. So we're going to follow up with an email to everyone that registered. We have these slides. We also put all of these grants in, kind of table format as a quick reference guide. And so after the webinar, we can email that out to folks, which will just give you a slightly different format of mostly the same information we're providing here, but will be useful to reference later on. And so this is the order that we're going to go through these grants as well. So starting with what's coming up right now, right around the corner, and then looking throughout the school year, what you can expect. And we'll go into a little bit more detail on each of them. We can jump to the next slide.
Great. So the first grant that you saw in that overall calendar, so we're just going to kind of run through our calendar of this year. So this is the first one that came out this year. This grant is currently open, the Farm to School Service Provider Grant. Applications closed for this grant on October 6th. This grant is intended for nonprofit organizations located in Vermont with the intention of supporting the supporting organizations to do the work that they can do to help schools and early childhood programs build robust farm to school programming. So the grant goals are to provide comprehensive farm to school training, technical assistance, and professional development and resources to schools and early childhood programs. These projects can be regional or statewide. This is really about, we know that technical assistance and coaching are really valuable tools to help schools and early childhood programs develop robust farm to school programming that is utilizing the experience and expertise of other schools that have done this work before, so that work's not happening in a vacuum, but we're really able to kind of help really fully utilize all the resources that are available. So the Farm to School Service Provider Grant is intended for these nonprofit organizations. And we had that application's open now. We had a webinar last week going into detail. Again, like Connor said, there's a full hour-long webinar recording available for this grant on our website right now. So hopefully some of the links work directly on this slide. And if not, that's a pretty simple address to just type in to get access to all of the farm to school grants that the agency offers. And that's where you'll find the webinar recording and the request for applications, which for all of our grants, our request for applications is this really robust, essentially it's a 20 to 30 page guidebook for how to apply for a grant. So we really strongly encourage folks to read an entire RFA to help get more context about what the funding opportunity is. The next grant in the calendar, which opened today, so excited to see this one go out into the world and really excited to see what comes through the door. So this is our Farm to School and Early Childhood Grant. This grant has existed since 2007 when the Farm to School and Early Childhood program was created at the Agency of Agriculture with the passage of the Rosen-McLaughlin Act. But it's evolved a little bit each year, and this year we're offering higher award amounts and a lot more flexibility in this program design. So these grants will be between $10,000 and $30,000. Schools and early childhood programs are eligible applicants for this. Independent schools are also eligible as long as they are operating federal child nutrition programs in the K-12 space. And the real purpose of this, as you saw in that 3Cs model, this grant is all about building programs that work across the 3Cs. So they have goals related to the community and the classroom and the cafeteria to help build and sustain robust farm to school programming across the state. That application opened today. It closes on October 29th. The request for applications is posted online. So really encourage any schools and early childhood programs on this call interested in developing or deepening their farm to school work to read that RFA and also to register for an applicant webinar on October 2nd to learn more. we will have Dana Hudson from the Vermont Farm to School and Early Childhood Network be joining for that webinar to provide also an overview of what the Vermont Farm to School Network offers. So really excited about this grant, really want to push folks to learn more and register for that webinar. And I'm available to answer any questions that you have about that. Before I leave this slide, I just want to note these two little icons on the top right here, an adult with a child and then a school building. Those are some icons we are trying to use to kind of clarify which grants are intended for an early childhood program to apply for or a school to apply for. So going forward, the rest of our slides, you'll see these throughout. So this grant is open to early childhood programs and schools.
Could you also, Gina,
Yeah.
it was in our matrix, it's not in our slides, but also just share what's the total funding available to help give people a context of, how many grants they could reasonably expect to be awarded?
That's a great point. Thanks for bringing that up, Connor. So this grant, there is $300,000 dedicated to this funding opportunity, and then the grants would be between $10,000 and $30,000. So depending on the types of projects that come in, we could fund 10 grants or we could fund 30 grants if I'm doing that mental math correctly. So that's the range. And for the last grant that I offered, the Farm to School Service Provider grant, which is still open until October 6th, there's $200,000 dedicated to this pool. Okay. Yeah, thank you. That's important, especially as we get into the next slide where I talk about the Farm to Institution Market Development Grant. So there might be a lot of questions. If there are questions about these grants, please feel free to just drop them into the Q&A or the chat, and we'll be getting to those throughout, especially at the end when we have Q&A time. So the next one here, the Farm to Institution Market Development Grant, this is a grant that Connor had mentioned that there might be a farmer on the call. This is the type of grant that a farm could apply for. The Farm to Institution Market Development Grant, we want schools and early childhood programs to be aware that this exists because it can be a really helpful tool to help a farm or a producer or a food hub or some other nonprofit organization figure out how to partner with a school. This grant is focused on the supply side of the question of how to get more local food into schools and early childhood programs, versus a lot of our other grants that we're going to talk about are on the demand side of like, how do you get more schools and early childhood programs to be able to purchase local food? This one is focused on how do you support farms and distributors to be able to get more food to schools. So this application is opening soon on the 30th, but actually the request for applications is available as of today on the website, I believe. And applications are due at the end of October. Award amounts are $10,000 to $30,000. However, since Connor noted, the total award bucket is only $30,000 for this grant, so it is pretty competitive. We usually fund 1 to 2 grants per year. But the goal of this is to help producers access the institutional food market. And this is actually also the only grant in this group that can also support producers in accessing other institutional markets like corrections or hospitals, in addition to schools and early childhood programs. So, yep, happy to share more about that if there are questions. Okay, and I'll pass it over to you, Connor.
So next is the Local Foods Incentive Grant. And this is the largest grant program that the Child Nutrition Programs team here at the Agency of Education administers. This is open to supervisory unions, school districts, as well as independent schools that are operating universal school meals. And this is only eligible to what we call the school food authority level. So it's not individual schools or sites applying, but the entire, again, supervisory union, school district, whatever that largest kind of organizing body is for that specific education program. These applications will open pretty soon. Hopefully about mid-October, we'll be able to open applications for this current round, and then applications close on December 9th. This is a big grant. It's a little confusing because there's two different tracks. And so first we have the baseline year grant, and that is for any school food authority that is applying for the first time. And so that application this year will be through our grant management system. If you're from a school on this webinar, you're probably familiar with that. If you're not, it's likely you haven't heard of that before, but if you connect with your partners at your local school, they should be familiar with the grant management system. The baseline year grant, it's very simple. We ask 4 pretty basic questions. It's all about getting your mind thinking about increasing your local purchasing. But it's not an onerous grant. There's not a lot of questions to answer or information to gather. It's really just some time for you to think about with your program, how could you be shifting purchasing in the next year to set you up for successful subsequent year grants. For that baseline year grant, if approved, which it's most likely if you put in a good faith effort, we're going to approve that application. We're really not looking to nitpick applications there. You'll receive a grant award, which is 15 cents per national school lunch program lunch served. And so, of course, that's going to vary based on how large your school meal program is. Awards are generally in the ballpark of $10,000 to $30,000. But I mean, if you're a school with only one site, only 600 students, it's likely going to be a much smaller grant award. And if you're one of our larger districts, your grant award could exceed that 30,000. But that 10 to 30 is just to give you a ballpark of usually this is what programs receive when they do get that 15-cent grant award. And then once you've applied to the baseline year grant, every year thereafter, you could apply for a subsequent year grant. That's done in Harvest, which is the child nutrition online platform for claims and applications. Again, if you're in a school, if you're in school meal programs, you probably know what Harvest is. If you're not directly involved, that might be unfamiliar to you, but when you are connecting with your school nutrition program to talk about these grant opportunities, they should be familiar and they'll know where to go to apply there. For the subsequent year grants, the kind of the thing you need to do to get this grant is you need to have 15% local purchasing based on dollar value. And so that's what we're looking for. The grant awards for subsequent year grants are tiered. So there's 3 different tiers. If you hit 15% local purchasing, you get 15 cents per lunch served as a grant award. 20% local purchasing, you'll get 20 cents per lunch served. And then 25% local purchasing, you'll get 25 cents per lunch served. So those grant awards scale as you're buying more local food. An important thing to flag here is that if you're under 15%, unfortunately, you don't get any grant awards. So if you worked really hard, really shifted your local purchasing and hit 13%, I know that by no means that's no small feat, right? That probably involved a lot of work and increased cost. Unfortunately, the way the grant program is set up, there wouldn't be any grant award for you. So that's one thing to be mindful of as you're considering this grant opportunity. When thinking about how much funding is available, there's $500,000 appropriated each year to this grant program. What happens though is if we ever hit, if award requests exceeded $500,000, all awards would be prorated. So we'd lower how much each grant award was proportionally, right? So we'd kind of scale it based on how much you were due. So everyone would still receive a grant award. It would just be smaller than you otherwise would be expecting. I'll share we've never exceeded $500,000. We come kind of close, but I'm expecting us to still be under that $500,000 threshold. at least for this coming year. I can't make any promises, right? I don't know until we receive those applications. But that's the total amount of funding available, and that's what would happen if funding exceeded, or if the requests exceeded that funding. One thing you might be thinking about if you're on this webinar is, well, what has my program done? Have we done a baseline year grant? Have we received a subsequent year grant? And the best place to check that is that 2025 report that I have linked down there in resources. Each year, our program submits a report to the legislature describing the trends that we saw in the prior year. But then if you scroll down to the bottom, we give a pretty detailed table of all the awards that have been provided. And if you're wondering, well, has my program even received a baseline year grant before? What I would do is scroll down to page 12, and starting there, it's the folks that did not receive an award. And one of the columns indicates, what year was a baseline award received. And if it says never in that column for your school, that means that your school's never applied, and that baseline year grant, again, is some pretty low-hanging fruit when thinking about time spent on the application and the odds that you'll receive some kind of grant award. Another nice thing about this program is that the money goes into the nonprofit school food service account. So the award funds need to be spent on school meals generally. That could be buying more local food for the next school year. That could be equipment upgrades or paying staff salaries, right? It can be flexible as long as it's going towards school meals in some way. Beyond that, though, there's no funding restrictions. There's no grant reports. Yeah, it's pretty flexible. And the reason is you've already done the work, right? Because the year prior, you did all that local purchasing. You provided us with all that documentation showing that you hit that 15% threshold. And so the money's yours at this point, and we want you to use it however you best can to support your program. Yeah, and I think that covers it. I guess one other thing I'll want to note is, for those familiar with the grant program, the questions for the applications haven't changed for this year, but both the way you apply for the baseline year grant and the way you apply for the subsequent year grant has changed a little bit. I'll be offering a webinar either in late October or early November, going through exactly what those changes look like so that you can be ready for your grant application. But just flagging that now, things are going to look a little bit this year compared to years in the past. The reason behind that is we're just streamlining the way we are able to make payments to schools. So those payments go out sooner, but that requires us to change a little of the just technical how grants are submitted so that we're able to do that. Ready to jump to the next slide, Gina?
Great, thanks, Connor. So the next grant coming up this fall is the Local Food for Schools and Childcare CSA grant. I'm assuming that there are folks on the call that have applied for or received an Agency of Ag CSA grant in the past. It was a grant program that we offered from 2021 to 2024. We did not offer the grant last year, and we are bringing the grant back again this year through this Local Food for Schools and Childcare pot of funding that we've received from the state of Vermont. So some context about what Local Food for Schools and Childcare is that the USDA had appropriated funds, or I guess they don't appropriate. The USDA had awarded grant funding to the agency in 2021 or 2022 for us to do this Local Food for Schools project. That was for K-12 only. The agency ran that program successfully. And then we learned in 2020, at the end of 2024, October 1st, 2024, that additional funding would be available through this expanded version of Local Food for Schools and Childcare by USDA. And then with the administration change at the federal level, that funding that we were awarded was then taken away. In place of that, the Vermont State Legislature provided a one-time appropriation of $500,000 to the agency to basically backfill for that loss in USDA funding. So within that one-time appropriation, the agency is offering two different funding opportunities. One of them is an expanded version of our prior CSA grant model. And then the other option that we're going to offer is going to be a food hub grant, which is going to be very similar to what we did with our USDA Local Food for Schools money a few years ago. But before we get into the food hub grant, talking about the CSA grant specifically, CSA stands for Community Supported Agriculture. This is a grant that will provide funding to help early childhood programs across the state directly access local food for their programs. Early childhood programs do not need to participate in CACFP in order to utilize this grant opportunity. This grant opportunity is open to individual early childhood providers to apply for, and it's also open to nonprofit organizations who will convene and provide administration to support several early childhood programs to get access to CSAs. We are encouraging early childhood providers to work together and submit group applications, either with one early childhood program serving as the fiscal agent for several programs, or working with a local nonprofit organization to make that happen. So this application will be announced in October. On October 14th is when those applications will open. We are going to have a webinar that will really go into more detail, as it's kind of a unique program design. We're going to go into detail on that. I believe it's going to be that first week, but we haven't started promotion of that webinar yet. And then the applications will be due at the end of November. You'll see the award range is pretty significant here. There's just no award maximum, essentially. We've budgeted $200,000 of the $500,000 that the agency is receiving in these one-time funds for this CSA grant. And then the other $300,000 is going to go to a food hub grant focused on getting local food to K-12. So the CSA grant is focused on getting local food to early childhood programs. The same limitation applies around the early childhood programs need to be registered or licensed with the state of Vermont. And then nonprofit organizations are also invited to apply and encouraged to apply and serve as fiscal agent for several providers. Yeah, I think that's all I'll really offer at this point. The minimum award is $1,000, which is probably the size, about the amount of like a large share, which might be the right fit for an early childhood center. Or it might be 2 shares, depending on the size of the CSA in your region. But yeah, the CSA grant has been this kind of proven model that the agency has offered to help connect early childhood programs with local farms in their area, to provide local food to students to Vermont's children where they're receiving care during the day. And that has turned out to be a really nice scale, especially for family child care programs to access. We are expanding the CSA grant this year just because we're limited in the number of grants that the agency can put out. And so we are really hoping that we can have some collaborative applications come in that will serve many early child care providers instead of every single early childhood provider receiving their own really small grant award. So that is the gist of the CSA grant. And again, there will be an hour-long webinar to go into more detail on this, and we're going to do a lot more outreach once that application opens. But we're really excited to bring the CSA grant back, And we're excited to test out this model using these one-time funds to really try to expand the reach of the program by engaging these nonprofit organizations who can serve as fiscal agents for several early childhood programs on some group applications. Maybe they're regional or statewide. There are a lot of different organizations that could be the right fit to serve as fiscal agent to help early childhood programs get access to community supported agriculture or CSA shares. Oh, this one's back to you, Connor.
Okay. So next we have the federal equipment grant. And I was just sitting here thinking like it might sound weird to folks. The reason we call it the federal equipment grant is simply because the source of funding is from the United States Department of Agriculture. So this is federal funding compared to a different grant I'll talk about later on is the state equipment grant, which uses state funds. And correct me if I'm wrong, Gina, all of our other grant opportunities are state funded, correct? Is this the only? Yeah.
Correct.
So this is the only federally funded grant program that we're talking about. I think that's important. One piece of confusion that I think we experienced a lot this past spring was there were larger stories about different federal programs being cut and how that applied to the programs we run here in Vermont. One example is so the local foods incentive, what I spoke about previously, that's state funded, so that was unaffected by those cuts. The local food for schools programs that was originally federally funded, that was cut though, and so as Gina mentioned, the state came in and backfilled that program just for 1 year with state funds. So again, we run 2 different equipment grants here at Child Nutrition Programs. One's the federal equipment grant, one's state equipment grant, and they have just kind of different requirements and they're run differently because they have different restrictions tied to those funding sources. So the federal equipment grant generally opens in late fall and applications then close in early winter. Those dates vary because we need to get that appropriation from the federal government, and that varies depending on what their funding looks like, just kind of how quickly they're able to pass that information along to us. So we're always in a holding pattern until we actually get those funds from the USDA. This grant's open to any school food authority that's operating the National School Lunch Program. This includes independent schools. So if you're working with our team here at Child Nutrition Programs to operate school meals, then you are eligible to apply. And award amounts are up to $15,000. Thinking about how much money is available, unfortunately, not this past year, but in a couple of years ago, funding was reduced for this grant program down to about $20,000. And so this is a very competitive grant. Typically, we're making 2 or 3 grant awards max, really. And so, sometimes we'll get 40 applications, right? And requests will just far exceed the monies that we have available. That's not to discourage you to apply. We still, if you have a need, we certainly encourage you to apply for whatever equipment you think is most appropriate through this grant opportunity. But what I would stress is really think about how you're answering the questions in that grant application. This also is applied for through the grant management system or GMS. We'll send out the notice of funding opportunity. It's pretty informal. It's through our child nutrition listserv. So if you are a food service director, a business manager at a school, or in some other way involved in school child nutrition programs, you can join our listserv. We send a weekly email with relevant updates, whether it's applications that are opening, reporting deadlines, general things about child nutrition that would impact you. And so we'll announce that these open there. An announcement of these grants opening is also on the grant management system dashboard, although I don't really know how many people find the opportunity there. So when you are submitting that application, frankly, people are like, there's only a couple things people are applying for here, right? It's like it's an oven, it's a dishwasher, it's a stove, it's a refrigerator, right? Um, and when we have 40 applications, quote unquote, best application, and we do that through the rubric, which is shared right in that grant opportunity in the GMS. So as you're submitting your application, one of the very first tabs is the rubric telling you exactly what we're looking for and how we're scoring each of those questions. And so specifically with this equipment, with this grant, because it's typically so competitive, I just really stress, use as descriptive examples as you can about how that oven, for example, might transform your program, or the scratch cooking you'll be able to do because your old oven just burns muffins when you're trying to bake muffins or something. It might seem kind of silly, but it's those really specific tangible examples help the scorers differentiate between the 15 ovens that people are applying for. I'll also share quite a bit of the application scoring is also based on things like, when did you last receive an equipment grant? What's the free and reduced percentage of the school that's applying? So there are some other things that you can't change, right? It's just kind of the demographics of the application that also factor into how those applications are scored. But that's the big thing that I'd want to share about the equipment grant. We can jump to the next slide.
Thanks, Connor. Yeah, when you were just talking about places where you're providing notice about awards, it just got me thinking that I'm going to drop a couple links in the chat when we get to Q&A about places where folks can sign up for more updates. So I'll drop a link to sign up for the Farm to School listserv, which anybody in Vermont is welcome to join at any time. That's managed by the Farm to School Network. And then I'll also drop a link to the Agency of Agriculture where I work, our division's newsletter, which is where all of the Farm to School grants that the agency offers will be announced there. So anyway, quick tangent. Also, so I just didn't forget, I'm going to put that stuff in the chat here. So hopefully folks will have a chance to see that when we get to the Q&A. And we're almost there. Hang in there, folks. We have like, how many more slides?
Just
two
a
more
few
grant
more.
slides. Yeah, just 2 more grant slides and a little program slide. So we're almost there. I know it's a lot of content. Thanks for your patience. So the last grant that I'll be talking about is the Local Food for Schools and Child Care Food Hub grant. This grant, again, as I mentioned before, is really modeled after what the agency learned when we implemented the USDA Local Food for Schools project in 2022 to 2024. So this grant will be open to nonprofit food hubs in the Vermont Food Hub Collaborative. Applications will open in January, close in February, and again, a really big award range here, $10,000 to $300,000. So we wanted to flag this. We know that most of the audience here are schools and early childhood programs and child nutrition program managers. But we just want to flag that these resources will be available soon. You as a school or child nutrition director, you are not responsible for applying for this grant to the agency. The responsibility falls on the food hubs. And that's kind of the beauty of this design, is that we will work with the food hubs. We will award a few food hubs within the Vermont Food Hub Collaborative. Each food hub will be assigned to work with a school food authority in Vermont. And those, there will be a certain amount of funding set aside for every school food authority based on enrollment data that we're going to get from Connor at the Agency of Education. And so it should be quite simple for schools to access these resources once they're available. So these deadlines aren't really pertinent to schools at this moment in time, but This is just giving you an update that we are in the process of setting up another round of local food for schools. Many schools, every school in Vermont participated in the local food for schools program, and we got really positive feedback in a survey that we did to to child nutrition program directors. So we are making these funds available this spring, and those grant agreements will sign with food hubs. I think our schedule is for that to happen in April or May at the latest. And so my guess is that food hubs would then be able to reach out directly to your child nutrition program about how much credit you have available to order directly free local food from their ordering system up to whatever eligible amount is set based on your enrollment data. So this is kind of a preview, but the goal here is to get more local food to schools and using the incredible food hub network that we have here in Vermont. We're very fortunate to have those partners to reach every single school food authority in Vermont. Okay, I'm going to pass it back to you, Connor.
Okay, so here's that other equipment grant I was talking about. This is the state equipment grant, uses state funds. Really, I'll just talk about differences because it's very similar to the federal equipment grant. Eligible entities, the only difference here is that independent schools are not eligible to apply. So this is only open to public school districts and supervisory unions. That's the way it was written into the legislation, so that's what we need to follow there. Award amounts are a little lower, so the maximum award amount is $10,000, but we have $100,000 to award. So we're able to send out many more awards. I think this last summer, there were 40 approved grant awards. So yeah, just much less competitive. We still get a lot of grant awards, but we're able to just spread that money around a little bit more easily there. Again, this is it's really for any equipment that is needed to support your school meal program. Those big ones I mentioned before are the most popular, but we'll see things like ice machines, serving lines, or like infrastructure stuff. So maybe like if you have specific power to your kitchen and you need work done there, all of those things can fall under an allowable use as well. In addition to the website link that we have here, I also provided a webinar that was recorded last year that you might want to just bookmark to view again this spring. We changed how the scoring was done. We just made the grant a little bit more flexible. We used to require a match. We don't require a match anymore, although it is optional. And so that might be useful to review before applying for this this coming spring. Applications typically open in April or May. And we can jump to the next slide. So this isn't necessarily a grant program, but the child nutrition programs is really trying to make this pitch to expand summer and after school meals. And so if you're on other webinars, you'll probably hear this a few times. I apologize. But there's an opportunity right now to significantly expand summer and after school meals here in Vermont. We have federal funding to pay for these meals, but we need local partners to help operate the sites. And so these partners could be schools, local governments, or nonprofit organizations. And this opportunity comes from, we just have some like flexible ways that we can access federal funding right now. And this is funding that isn't currently being considered for cuts. And we know that there are cuts happening to the nutrition safety net in Vermont through some changes at the federal level. And so we are pushing these two opportunities as a way to provide some more nutrition support to the community that isn't at risk of cuts. Summer and after school meals are also a good opportunity to incorporate local foods into your farm to school programs. And these programs can also pair really well with farm to school extracurricular activities that you may be doing, like after school clubs or things like that. So I think there are some really creative ways to pair this with other farm to school programming. And this might be, it might check the community box a little bit more in those 3 C's of farm to school compared to your traditional school meal programs. So something to think about. Again, we're really pushing this. You can use the mapper that's linked here that shows where in the state is eligible for these programs. And if this is something that you are interested in, whether you work at a school and you're curious about expanding your summer offerings or after school meals, or if you're a nonprofit organization and you'd like to venture into the space of actually directly providing meals to students through one of these programs, our team's available. And again, this is a priority for us, so we're very excited to work with you and see if it's something that's viable for your operations. Links to the website are included on this slide, as well as contact information for the 2 folks on my team who are the leads for these programs. All right, jump to the next slide. And so that covers it. So we just ran through 8 different grant programs. Again, in our follow-up email, we'll share out, in addition to a PDF of these slides, that grant matrix that I mentioned that provides the same information, just in a different format. And yeah, I think with that, we're ready for any questions. We are trying to check off questions as they came in, but here's your opportunity to ask any more questions that you might have about any of these grants. We have about 25-30 minutes, and so whether it's a really broad question or specific, we're happy to get into it. And as folks are thinking about that, we do have one in the chat that I believe is for you, Gina. And the question was, is there information about local suppliers for the LFSCC CSA grant?
Good question, Karen. Not at this time. So at this point, the design of the CSA grant using those LFSCC funds, early childhood programs and nonprofit organizations are going to be the applicants for this grant program, not farms or local suppliers. So, so yeah, we don't have information tailored to that audience because the folks that we're requesting grant applications from are early childhood programs and nonprofit organizations that are supporting early childhood programs to get local food. Do you think that answered that question, Connor, or Karen? Is there anything that you'd want to add to that? If you want, I can unmute you. I've allowed your mic, so you could unmute if you wanted now, but you can unmute yourself if you want to speak up. No pressure.
What was I going to say? Here we go. And just flagging some other questions that were answered as folks are thinking. Well, Karen responded here. So Karen was looking to see who are the suppliers, like who could Karen or a program be buying from for the CSA grant?
Okay, thank you. That makes, yes, I understand now. Okay, so where do you find a CSA? Great question. So we often refer folks that are looking to find a CSA in your area. I'd recommend talking to other early childhood programs in your area to find out if they are picking up CSAs for their programs. Maybe they've applied for an Agency of Ag grant in the past. I think that would be kind of like my first suggestion, just because we are trying to encourage programs to work together and submit group applications. Having that connection could be helpful. But There is also a beautiful map that NOFA Vermont, or the Northeast Organic Farming Association of Vermont, maintains. And they have a directory that allows you to search for farms in Vermont. I don't think they need to be certified organic to land on this list. So I've dropped that into the chat, and then what you'll do is you'll scroll down into this directory and look for features is one of the options, and then that's where you click CSA and then hit search, and you can search within your county, or if you allow your location, then you can do within a certain distance of whatever your IP address is. So yeah, there's the link, and then features CSA is what you would need to do to use the NOFA tool to find CSAs near you. But again, really recommend talking to other early childhood programs in your area to find out if they have farms that they're working with already, what they'd recommend. I think one other thing I would offer about CSAs is that CSA programs have really developed in the past few years, especially since COVID. And this traditional CSA model, which is still really widely utilized, is what we call a farmer's choice CSA, where the farmer, you pay upfront for a CSA share, and that actually is consistent. So that's always part of a CSA model, is that the community is providing an upfront payment to the farm so that they can pay those upfront costs of seeds and labor, and really supporting farms in that time period in the spring, April to May, where there are a lot of expenses and not a lot of revenue coming in. And then in return for that, you are supporting a local farm. You are also getting guaranteed access to produce throughout the year, throughout the rest of the growing season, and it's often offered at a discounted price because you've supported them at the beginning stages. But so there's this traditional model where you get a box every week. Usually you pick it up at the farm, but there are also some farms that have farm stands and will offer a more flexible credit style CSA, where you're buying a CSA, but it's essentially like a gift card to that farm stand. And then you can stop in at your convenience and pick up items that you want from that farm stand. So those are different models for what CSAs look like nowadays. There are more and more of these credit style CSAs using a farm stand. And that can be really helpful for an early childhood program when they know they're dealing with picky eaters that might not have a lot of use for greens, especially at the beginning of the season. Then you can go and kind of pick what you want, and you know that your kids are going to appreciate and enjoy. I hope that answers your question, Karen, but feel free to reach out as well or follow up.
Great, and we're getting some good questions. So before addressing some of them, I'll just flag something that Gina answered previously. And that's an important to flag that I believe both of the early childhood grants here, so the Farm to School and Early Childhood Grant Program and the CSA Share Grant Program, you do not need to be participating in CACFP, the Federal Child Nutrition Program, to be eligible. You just need to be is it licensed child care program?
Licensed, yep, licensed or registered. So regulated by the state of Vermont. Yeah.
So that was a great question someone asked there. And then I'll jump, we've got some in chat, we've got some in the Q&A. All of them are good. So yeah, I'll start here with a question. This is about the local foods incentive. What should school food authorities do if they have previously applied for the baseline year grant but haven't met the 15% local purchasing threshold? Do they reapply for the baseline year grant? So good question. The answer is no. So once you apply that first time for the baseline year grant, that's the only time you're ever eligible for a baseline year grant. And so if the next year you don't hit 15%, we appreciate if you still, apply or report that more detailed purchasing data in your financial report. But essentially, you just kind of skip that year. Nothing happens, nothing bad happens, right? You're not required to hit 15%. You just wouldn't get a grant award. And then if it takes you a year or 2 years or 3 years to hit 15%, doesn't matter. Whenever you hit 15% again, you can apply for that year following that same entering the data into the financial report and harvest, and you'd be eligible for a subsequent year grant for that year that you hit 15%. So you can drop in and out of the program. We totally understand that. I mean, it's hard to hit 15%, and some years it might just not be feasible. That's perfectly fine. But that baseline year grant, it's one time only. So once you get that grant award, you're no longer eligible to apply for a baseline year grant again. Let's see here, and then next, so I mentioned, so it seems like the equipment grants are not for early childhood programs. And unfortunately, that's correct. Both the federal and the state equipment grants are only for K through 12 institutions, right? Those supervisory unions, school districts, and for the federal equipment grant, independent schools that operate the National School Lunch Program are also eligible. I will just share here for the state equipment grant, that's just written into the law or the legislation that authorizes those funds. That could be, fairly easily changed in that it would just require the state legislature that's a little bit more active than the federal legislature or federal lawmakers. So if you were feeling like you wanted to do some advocacy, you could always reach out to your local rep and request that early childhood education centers that are participating in CACFP became eligible for the equipment grant as well, right? It wouldn't cost any more money. It would just expand eligibility there. But that's correct. Currently, only schools are eligible for both of those equipment grants. And then I'll jump to the chat. And there is a question, is there somewhere I can look to see what grant recipients have done in the past, perhaps specifically for the early childhood grant? And I think this probably is a best fit for the Farm to School and early childhood grant. So is there any overview of what past projects or grant recipients have done?
Yeah, great question. So for in an early childhood setting, some of the projects have focused on getting more local food. We had this really creative project a few years ago, which was a network, like an early childhood professional network based in the Hartford, Wyndham, Windsor area. They applied for a group grant, and there were like between 15 and 20 early childcare providers, a mix of family childcare homes and licensed early childcare centers. They applied together as a group for a farm to school grant. And through that grant, everybody got access to their entire grant budget was dedicated to getting raised bed supplies. So every single early childhood program got a raised bed through that project. And then they also they started a Facebook group focused on sharing lessons and what they're learning about gardening and what different activities and curriculum items are being supportive to helping their students connect to agriculture. And so I thought that was a really creative project a couple of years ago in the early childhood space. There have been other projects focused on professional development, and there was, I think it recently happened or it's coming up soon. There's a mini conference for early childhood professionals down in the Bennington, Rutland area. And in terms of like what is publicly available to like look to see what other early childhood programs have done, you can look at our website and we have a list of prior grantees, and we also each year we put together an annual report to the Vermont State Legislature about the outcomes of our work. So you can read about some of the different projects that were funded there and the goals. But I think in terms of stories around like in-depth case studies, the agency hasn't put out a case study on any early childhood grants in the past few years. But the Vermont Farm to School and Early Childhood Network has kind of gathered some of those stories. This is one that was published, I think, last year, focused on early childhood education and curriculum. But if you just go to the Farm to School, vermontfarmtoschool.org, which is the network website, I'm dropping so many links in the chat. If you go to the stories on the Vermont Farm to School and Early Childhood Network website, then you can read, there are a bunch of different stories of what farm to school looks like across the state right now. And that would actually be also in the K-12 space, in addition to early childhood.
Great, thanks, Gina. And then as I ask this question, do you mind jumping to the next slide just so folks have our email?
Yeah,
Perfect.
great.
So the next one is about local food for schools. Can you provide more information on the allotment of funds for the Food Hub grant? How are the grants being divided amongst SFAs and hubs?
Great question. So the funding is being divided amongst the SFAs. So it's based on enrollment data against the available funds that we have, which is we've dedicated $300,000 to the local food for schools and childcare program. So the funding will be based on enrollment. Each SFA will get an allocation, and that will be determined by the agency in the, in like December, January. But that information won't be relevant to schools until the grant applications are actually coming in from the food hubs and those decisions have been made. So the food hubs are going to be responsible for essentially like executing the allotments that the agency has set that are based on enrollment data. So if a food hub is going to serve 5 schools and each one of their allotments is $2,000, which none of the numbers are that clean, then the food hub would get $10,000 plus a small amount for indirect administration of moving that food and managing that grant funding. So I hope that provides an explanation. It's enrollment-based data that determines how much each school food authority would be eligible for. And then the food hub awards are based on which food hub ends up being selected to serve any combination of school food authorities, plus administration of those funds.
Perfect. And it looks like those are all the questions we have. One more here. Let's see. Okay, we've got a couple more. All right. So next, if a school food authority has net cash resources that we need to spend down, are we eligible to apply for any of these grants with the exception of the local foods incentive? So great question. This is a little in the weeds for folks that aren't in the school nutrition world. So if you have excess net cash resources, right? So if the cash on hand for your program exceeds 3 months average operating expenses, you would not be eligible for the equipment grants, right? So that flags specifically for any of the child nutrition program grants. So if you're applying to any of the Agency of Agriculture's grants, that wouldn't apply. Local foods incentive, yeah, if you did the work for 15%, we're gonna grant those awards to you. But for those equipment grants, no, you would not be eligible because we want you to spend down those excess funds. Great question. And then we have, from what you've discussed, I got the impression that the local food for schools and childcare CSA grant was only for early education programs. Is that true?
Yes, so that is only for early childhood education programs to utilize, but nonprofit organizations that are going to help early child care programs get access to CSAs are also eligible applicants for that grant. So yeah, that one is for early childhood. And the other way that we're using the local food for schools funding is through the food hub grant that I just discussed, and that is for K-12. And then the other grant, the Farm to School and Early Childhood grant, is open to schools that are K-12 and early childhood. So I just wanted to clarify that as well.
Yeah. And so local food for schools, I just, yeah. So for you, Steve, your money or your school's money would be coming through that food hub grant. And so whatever allocation based on enrollment that your school has would then be tied to whichever food hub ends up serving your school, and you'll be able to spend those funds down that way.
Thank you, Connor.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, everyone. I hope that this was helpful. Hopefully you have signed up for any of those different kind of communication channels that are appropriate for you, because there will be, as we mentioned, lots more trainings as you've presumably checked whatever you think is most applicable to you, so you can have that on your radar for this school year. We will be sending out an email again with those slides with that matrix that I think will be a helpful reference as you're trying to pull these different grants apart. And let's see, we had another question come in. Are any grants for growers or food shelves who want to use local produce but do not have the labor or tools to process the fruit or vegetables?
I'm happy to address that, Connor.
Mhm.
So, and maybe you can support me if there's anything else you want to fill in. These grants are meant to support getting food into the institutional food market, namely schools and early childhood programs. In the case of the Farm to Institution Market Development Grant, it's also focused on getting local food into corrections facilities or colleges or nursing homes. So food shelves would not necessarily be kind of connected to the Farm to School grant sphere. I think for growers that want to work on getting additional processing space in order to serve local food, they could explore the Farm to Institution Market Development Grant or other Agency of Agriculture opportunities. The Agency of Agriculture has an annual Working Lands Enterprise Initiative grant opportunity that can help farms meet their business goals, which might be scaling up in some sort of way. I also just want to flag, I'm thinking of, there are some local nonprofit organizations that you could partner with if you yourself have local food, but you don't have the capacity to process it. I'm thinking in particular about the Center for an Agricultural Economy's Just Cut program, which processes local veg and gets that kind of like minimally processed product into colleges and also into schools across the state. Salvation Farms is doing some lightly processed products like, peeling potatoes and chopping them and putting them in freezer bags. That's the kind of stuff that Just Cut does, and I think Salvation Farms is too. So those are some nonprofit partners that you might be interested in connecting with to learn about their capacity. And then if your business wants to like expand its capacity to do something on site, then perhaps the Working Lands Enterprise Initiative or other agency of agriculture grants focused on farm business viability would be a good fit.
Thanks. We also had a good suggestion in the chat about contacting your county's conservation district to help with funding opportunities.
Yeah, and I would add to that too. I love that suggestion. Another resource from the agency is we have a navigator position, and she is also someone who any farm or food business could reach out to if they're struggling to understand which grant is the best fit for them. So her name's Jennifer Porter, and I'll drop her contact info in the chat as well.
Then we had a question, do most of these places deliver or would we need to pick up? And I'm assuming by these places we're referring to like farms or producers.
Oh, is this maybe a CSA? I'm getting like LFSCC CSA
Yeah.
type vibes. CSA, the CSA grant. So when you're finding what farm you want to partner with, most farms would require pickup. But there are a few farms that do offer delivery. And as you're kind of deciding which farm you want to partner with for an application, yeah, I would definitely look into what the delivery options are if that's something that's essential. And then if pickup is the only option, trying to figure out what time of day that needs to happen, how could you fit that into your program? Those are all parts of the application, just to make sure that there's a plan in place for the pickup and utilization of local produce through this LFSCC CSA grant.
Well, thank you, everyone. Gina and I are both always available through email. You can give us a call. We're happy to set up a meeting to talk through any more of these. We can share more resources once you've gone through what was available on the slides and those links that we had. But we're excited to see so much interest and involvement with the different farm to school grant programs that the state offers. Yeah, and we appreciate your time and attention this afternoon.
Thank you all. Thanks, Connor. All right, reach out with any other questions. There's our contact info. So thanks, everyone.